Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about the difference and similitudes on class between Luther King and Nelson Mandela, and I will defend my thesis in which I affirm that although Mandela and Luther King achieved equality between races in their own countries, Mandela represents a higher political and economic class than Luther King, while Luther King represents a higher cultural class. So first I will discuss the similitudes on class of both characters, and then I will contrast one with the other to explain why I consider one better. In the first place, it is important to explain what is racial segregation. This is a discrimination against certain communities because of their color of their skin or ethnic origins. It is characterized for separation of roles and space because of the idea of a superior intellect, capacities, or abilities of one race over the one discriminated. Luther King and Nelson Mandela were activists who achieved equality in their own countries of origin. For one side, Luther King in the United States, and in the other, Nelson Mandela in South Africa. According to Matthews 2003, despite Americans consider class as irrelevant and categorize themselves as a middle-class nation in which everyone had the same opportunities to succeed, there are different types of class that could be identified in their society and differentiate them like economic class, cultural class, and political class, that these give them better opportunities or less opportunities to accomplish their objective. So having said that, I will start talking about the similitudes of both characters. So both are known for achieving equality between races in their own countries, and both part from bases of Christian beliefs. For one side, Martin Luther King in his speech I Have a Dream reflect that Christian belief on basis in which he claimed that God had created all humans equally, so all should have the same opportunities to succeed in life, and his movement was characterized for a non-violent protest. Like was Luther King, Mandela reflected a Christian basis in his statements to defend and achieve equality. In his speech, Our Deepest Fear, reflect that Christian basis in which he claimed that all should have same opportunities. But contrary to Luther King, he defended that violent action was necessary to end apartheid. Having this in mind, it's evident how Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela share the Christian belief in which they support his fight for achieving equality. In terms of class, it can be said they share a lifestyle in which they behave, having in mind and following the Christian beliefs. Cultural class is a division of individuals of a society taking into account elements such as level of education, lifestyle, family and social background, and not only what family have economically. With this in mind, I affirm that the fact that Luther King defended that no violent actions were necessary to accomplish equality reflects a better cultural background than Mandela, because reflects more the Christian beliefs they defend. So both, in their battle of achieving equality, assume and show how they behave with Christian belief on race, reflecting a common lifestyle. But I consider that Luther King represents better the Christian belief than Mandela because he promotes a no-violent movement. On the other side, respect to the difference of both characters, Mandela achieves more political influence and economic class than Luther King. For one side, Mandela was president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999 and was the country's first black head of state. Considering that, it's valid to affirm that he had more political influence compared to Luther King, who although get a lot of influence in those who follow him and accomplish equality in the United States, didn't achieve the same level of political influence that Mandela had on the Church of President. It is important to highlight that Martin Luther King died at the age of 39, so he maybe could have more political influence if he hadn't been killed. On the other side, respect economic class, Mandela had more annual income than Luther King because of his Church of President. Meanwhile, Luther King had the economical income of a minister of the church. This demonstrates that Mandela had more economical class and political influence than Luther King. The political class reflects how influence had a person in a determinate context in political aspects and public administration. This influence allowed the person control the context following the personal interest. Examples of this are the difference of the political class evidenced in the different role played by a mayor, senator, and president. Their political power is different, so it is their political class. On the other hand, economical class is a division of a society taking into account what a person had earned in terms of money and material things. Economic class classifies a person in terms of what they had that can be tangible and measurable, like valuable things, high income capital, etc. For example, a president of a company would have better economic class than a housekeeper because he have a better salary, so would have more income to acquire better good and service. Having said that, I consider although Mandela had better economic and political class than Luther King, is cultural class that can say more about the achievements of a character and would determine which one was better. So respect to the difference in cultural class of the two characters, despite Mandela was surrounded by famous and noble people such as Michael Jackson, Whoopi Goldberg, Queen Elizabeth, and came from a royal family, Luther King demonstrated a better cultural class because he had a higher level of education than Mandela. Luther King was Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology and had a PhD in theology, even though Mandela did study laws, did not study as much as Luther King did. On the other side, Mandela came from a royal family and represented the image of the African gentleman. Having this in mind, I consider Martin Luther King was better because despite of having less political and economic class, he accomplished great change in his country, demonstrating that value that Americans had in which they only take credit of what they had accomplished and not for had born rich. So, in conclusion of what it had been said, although Mandela and Luther King achieved equality between races in their own countries, Mandela represents a higher political and economic class than Luther King, while Luther King represents a higher cultural class. Both characters, in their research for achieving equality, based their movement and had great influence on Christian faith. This reflects a common lifestyle in which they behave and follow the ideas of the Christian faith, demonstrating also a common cultural class. But Luther King movement was characterized for a no-violent movement, while Nelson Mandela defends that violent action was necessary to end apartheid. This demonstrates a better cultural class from Luther King because he reflects more the Christian ideals which they defend. Also, he had a higher level of education and reflects that value that Americans had in which they only can take credit of what they had accomplished and not for only had born rich. On the other side, Mandela had more economic and political class than Luther King because he could rise to the charge of the first black president on South Africa, and Mandela came from a royal family representing the image of the African gentleman. I consider cultural class is the best way to determine who person is better because it reflects the hard work and dedication that person have done to accomplish his or her objectives and not only for have powerful income or political influence.